The people of ancient Israel were intended to be a nation who worshiped the one true God, but unfortunately, several of the kings of both Judah and Israel fell into the sin of idolatry. However, King Josiah, who ruled over the kingdom of Judah for 31 years, is remembered as a righteous king. Josiah's reign was marked by religious reforms or purges as he led a national return of the people away from idolatry and back to the worship of Yahweh. In his efforts to rout out idol worship in the kingdom, Josiah destroyed the high places and altars associated with child sacrifice, such as the fire pit of Tophet, so that no man might make his son or daughter to pass through the fire to Molech. See 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 10. Now at the Topheth or Tophet fire pit did the priests of Moloch beat drums in order to drown out the screams of the children as they slowly burned to death. This atrocious scene was a living hell, which in time made the location of these sacrifices synonymous with the fire of a literal hell, the place of everlasting suffering for human souls. For Tophet is also connected symbolically and geographically with the earthly Gehenna, which in the original Greek of the New Testament is mentioned by Christ as a place of eternal fire, metaphorically equating Gehenna with hell. Along with Tophet, Gehenna was originally referred to as the biblical Valley of Ben Hinnom, or Gay Hinnom, which is a real valley located just south of Jerusalem. Being an ancient site associated with fire and human sacrifice, over time Gehenna became a symbol of the everlasting punishment of the hellfire. Going further back in history, before the days of the kings of Judah and Israel, the worship of idols was a phenomenon practiced by many ancient cultures in and around the land of Canaan. For the neighboring non-Israelite nations who practiced idol worship would indeed influence the children of Israel towards the sinful practices that God had commanded them to abstain from. Because of the covenant made between God and the children of Israel, the sin of idolatry was also associated with the sin of adultery, as the scriptures speak of how Israel went a-whoring after other gods, to worship them and make sacrifices unto them, instead of staying faithful to the one true God and serving him and him alone. And one such Canaanite god that the children of Israel worshipped was Molech. Now Molech was a national deity of the Ammonites, whose worship was associated with child sacrifice. This horrible practice involved passing children through the fire as an offering to Molech, which many times was perpetrated by the child's own parents. The idol of Moloch was depicted as having the head of a bull and the body of a man. The hands of Moloch were fashioned tilting downwards, with the palms facing up. This way, when a child was placed upon the open palms of the idol, the baby rolled down into the fire, as if it was Moloch himself who was performing the abomination. The god Molech also appears in the Old Testament as Milcom or Malcham, see Zephaniah chapter 1 verse 15, and in the New Testament, Molech is rendered as Moloch, see Acts chapter 7 verse 43. Citing this, many biblical scholars are of the opinion that the gods Milcom and Molech are basically the same entity, or that they are at least closely related. Now the name Milcom translates to their king, as the root word Molech is derived from the word Melech, meaning king in Hebrew, which further connects Molech with the concept of a powerful and royal deity. What further binds these two Canaanite gods together is that both Milcom and Molech are synonymously linked to child sacrifice. By living on the borders of the Ammonites, the children of Israel were influenced into the worship of Molech and unfortunately adopted the religious practices of their idolatrous neighbors. However, the God of Israel made it abundantly clear in the books of the law that the worship of idols was emphatically forbidden. Furthermore, in the book of Leviticus, the sinful practice of passing infants through the fire unto the deity Moloch is specifically prohibited. See Leviticus chapter 20, verses 2 through 5. Although the Lord God instructed his people to stay away from the idol of Moloch, the Israelites impiously defied the Almighty and built altars to this false and evil god on the Mount of Olives and as previously mentioned in the Valley of Hinnom, Gehenna. In response to Israel's sin of idolatry, the Lord would send forth his holy servants, the prophets, to guide the people away from the worship of idols and back to the worship of Yahweh. One such prophet, named Amos, would scold the children of Israel for taking up the tabernacle of Moloch and for worshipping the star of their god Chiun. See Acts chapter 5, verse 26. In the New Testament, St. Stephen, during his speech before the Sanhedrin, would quote this verse from Amos, but instead of calling the star of their god Chiun, he identified this star as Remphan. See Acts chapter 7, verse 43. This passage suggests that Remphan was associated with the idol-worshipping practices involving celestial symbols. Being linked to idol worship, Remphan may have represented a star-shaped idol or possibly a certain celestial deity. As referred to as Chiun in the Old Testament, the star Remphan may have represented the planet Saturn, for in several ancient Middle Eastern cultures, Saturn was recognized as an important celestial body and was reverenced as a divine figure in both Babylonian and Assyrian astrology. Some physical representations of Remphan may be linked to the 8-pointed star of the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, along with the 5-pointed star known as a pentagram, also vying for a possible representation for Remphan. Additionally, the 6-pointed star of David has also been suggested as a true symbol of Remphan. Now what is referred to as the Star of David is in fact a hexagram, with the word hex often recognized in the occult as denoting the use of a spell or a curse. However, the pentagram is also used in satanic worship, so it is not conclusive if the Star of David is truly the Star of Remphan, and neither can we definitively state that the Star of Ishtar represents Saturn. Therefore, the identification of the ancient symbol of the Star of Remphan is inconclusive and debatable, and thus we cannot confidently associate any of these ancient star symbols as being in affirmative relation to Remphan. In closing, it shouldn't go without mentioning the ancient Canaanite idol Baal, who was worshipped in the days of the kingdoms of Judah and Israel, a practice of which the prophet Elijah primarily stood against. To the Canaanites, Baal was upheld as a prominent deity associated with fertility, thunderstorms, and agriculture. The worship of Baal involved rituals such as rites of fertility, sacred prostitution, and even child sacrifice. At times the people of Israel adopted the worship of Baal, which was a major sin against Yahweh. This in turn inspired Elijah to proclaim to the idolatrous Israelites, "How long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him." See 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 21. Ultimately, Elijah challenged and defeated the prophets of Baal, but this pious act would not entirely purge idol worship from among the kingdoms of Judah and Israel. For further on in the saga of the Israelites, the prophet Jeremiah would be a fierce critic of all the idol worship perpetrated in Judah. Jeremiah repeatedly encouraged the people to abandon the idols and return to the worship of Yahweh, while simultaneously prophesying of severe consequences that would befall them if they continued in their sin. This apostasy led God to speak unto his servant Jeremiah concerning the severity of the sin of Judah by saying, "And they built the high places of Baal, which are in the valley of the sons of Hinnom, to cause their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire unto Molech, which I commanded them not, neither came it to my mind, that they should do this abomination, to cause Judah to sin." See Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 35. This verse highlights God's sheer disapproval of the abomination of idolatry and child sacrifice, as such vile and evil practices stand in direct conflict with God's righteous and holy will. This is the Leap of Faith.